After discovering his wife Rebecca's affair with contractor Miles through hidden hotel receipts, divorced mechanic Owen sells his auto repair shop in Phoenix and accepts a job offer managing a fishing charter fleet in coastal Maine. I found those receipts tucked inside her gym bag when I was looking for the car registration after a minor fender bender, 3 different upscale hotels over 2 months, all charged to the credit card she claimed to use only for emergencies. The Westin, the Marriott, the Four Seasons, places that cost more per night than I made in 2 days at the auto shop, and I realized I'd been working overtime to pay for her betrayal without even knowing it. When I confronted Rebecca about them, she didn't even try to lie convincingly, just gave me this look like I was an inconvenience she'd been hoping to avoid indefinitely, then launched into this rehearsed speech about how our marriage had been dead for months and she deserved to feel alive again. Miles was the contractor we'd hired to renovate our kitchen 6 months earlier, a smooth-talking guy in expensive boots who somehow stretched a 3-week job into 3 months while finding excuses to work late when I was pulling evening shifts at the shop. I should have noticed how she started wearing makeup to run errands and buying new lingerie she never wore around me, how she suddenly developed an interest in craft cocktails and expensive wine, but I was too busy trying to save money for the down payment on the house she kept saying she wanted, working 60-hour weeks and skipping lunches to build the future she claimed we both dreamed about. The divorce proceedings dragged for 10 months while Rebecca painted herself as the victim, claiming I was emotionally distant and drove her into Miles' arms through my obsession with work and financial planning, conveniently forgetting that she'd been the one pushing me to take on more clients so we could afford the lifestyle she wanted. Her lawyer made it sound like my dedication to building our future was somehow a form of neglect, while I watched her spend thousands on a wardrobe upgrade and spa treatments during what should have been the most stressful period of her life, transforming herself into someone I barely recognized with her new highlights and designer handbags. The irony wasn't lost on me that she'd complained about my long hours while secretly using that time to betray everything we'd built together, turning my work ethic into the villain in her story when it had really been funding her escape plan all along. She moved in with Miles before the ink was even dry on our separation papers, posting photos on social media of their weekend trips to Sedona and expensive dinners at restaurants we could never afford together, like she was advertising her upgrade to anyone who cared to notice. Her Instagram stories showed champagne brunches and spa days, a lifestyle funded by his contractor income and her complete lack of shame, while I was eating peanut butter sandwiches and sleeping on Connor's couch during the worst months of the legal battle. Within 3 weeks of the final decree, I liquidated my tools, motorcycle, and workshop equipment, using the proceeds to fund my relocation to a place where nobody knew my history or expected me to pretend things were fine when everything I'd worked for had been systematically dismantled by the person I trusted most. My Navy buddy Connor had connections with a maritime company needing experienced hands to oversee boat maintenance and fishing operations in Bar Harbor, and the job offer felt like providence rather than coincidence, a chance to use the same mechanical skills in an environment where the only drama came from weather and tides instead of betrayal and broken promises. The 2,400-mile drive to coastal Maine felt like the longest and most liberating journey of my life, each mile putting more distance between me and the wreckage of a marriage I'd fought to save while my wife was planning her exit strategy with another man, watching the desert give way to mountains and finally to the endless Atlantic horizon that would become my new beginning. I'd left Phoenix with nothing but my truck and a duffel bag, but I'd gained something more valuable than any of the material possessions I'd lost. The absolute certainty that I'd never again waste my energy on someone who saw my love as a convenience rather than a commitment. 2 months into his new routine of maintaining fishing vessels and learning lobster boat operations, Owen receives a barrage of photos from old Phoenix friends showing Rebecca's lavish wedding to Miles at an upscale resort. I was under the hood of a 30-foot charter boat when my phone started buzzing incessantly, and I figured it was Connor checking on my progress with the engine rebuild until I saw the notification count climbing past 15 messages in under 10 minutes. The first photo showed Rebecca in what looked like a $10,000 gown, all flowing silk and intricate beadwork that probably cost more than I'd spent on our entire original wedding, standing next to Miles in a tuxedo that screamed expensive tailoring and smug satisfaction. The ceremony appeared to have cost more than their entire annual household budget during their marriage, complete with a live band, ice sculptures that belonged in a luxury hotel lobby, and over 200 guests filling what looked like the ballroom of some exclusive Scottsdale resort where a single dinner probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. I scrolled through image after image of pure excess, from the elaborate floral arrangements that probably cost more than most people's cars to the champagne fountain that seemed designed specifically for social media documentation, and I realized she'd finally achieved the fairy tale wedding she'd always claimed she wanted but could never afford with a simple mechanic who prioritized savings over spectacle. The photographer had clearly been expensive too, capturing every angle of what appeared to be a celebration designed more for Instagram perfection than genuine joy, with professional lighting that made everything look like a scene from a luxury lifestyle magazine. My former neighbor Kirk, who somehow remained neutral during the divorce and maintained friendships with both sides despite the drama, sent cryptic messages hinting that something explosive had happened during the reception speeches, followed by a series of laughing emojis that suggested the drama had been thoroughly entertaining for those who witnessed it firsthand. The photos showed Rebecca beaming like she'd won the state lottery, her face radiant with the kind of joy I'd only seen glimpses of during our best moments together, while Miles looked smugly satisfied in his expensive tuxedo as he posed for what seemed like hundreds of professional shots designed to document their supposed upgrade from ordinary love to luxury lifestyle. I found myself studying her expression in each image, looking for some sign of doubt or regret, but all I saw was pure triumph, the satisfaction of a woman who believed she'd traded up from her starter husband to the real prize, someone who could fund the lifestyle she'd always felt entitled to but never earned. The reception photos were even more elaborate, featuring a multi-tiered cake that belonged in a magazine spread, centerpieces that probably cost more than I made in a week, and a crowd of guests who all looked like they belonged at country club galas rather than the backyard barbecues and casual get-togethers that had defined our social life during 7 years of what I'd thought was genuine partnership. One photo showed the couple's first dance on a floor surrounded by what looked like thousands of dollars worth of roses and candles, creating an atmosphere of romance that felt more like a movie set than a real moment between two people who'd supposedly found true love through betrayal and deception. The contrast between this elaborate spectacle and our simple courthouse ceremony followed by dinner at a family restaurant wasn't lost on me, and I realized she'd probably been embarrassed by the modest celebration we'd shared, viewing it as evidence of my inadequacy rather than proof of our genuine commitment to building a future together based on substance rather than show. I deleted the images after 30 seconds of scrolling, feeling nothing but relief that this chapter of my life was permanently closed, and went back to working on the boat engine with hands that remained perfectly steady, grateful that my new life measured success in honest work completed rather than appearances maintained and debts accumulated for the sake of impressing people who probably wouldn't remember the wedding in 6 months anyway. Kirk calls Owen from a roadside diner, still processing what he witnessed at the wedding reception. I was replacing fuel injectors on a lobster boat when Kirk called me 3 days after the wedding, and I could tell from his voice that he was still trying to wrap his head around whatever drama had unfolded at the reception, speaking in the hushed tones of someone who'd witnessed a spectacular implosion and wasn't quite sure how to process it all. He started by apologizing for sending all those photos, claiming he'd been caught up in the spectacle and wanted to share the absurdity of it all, but his tone suggested there was more to the story than just expensive decorations and designer clothing that had cost more than most people's annual salaries. Rebecca's college roommate Diana had delivered what seemed like a standard maid of honor speech about love and commitment, but Kirk said her words carried pointed undertones about choosing loyalty even when nobody was watching and being honest when the truth hurts, phrases that seemed innocent enough to most guests but hit Rebecca like physical blows that left her visibly shaken. The seemingly innocent toast caused Rebecca to drain of color and spend the remainder of the evening looking like she'd been personally attacked, checking her phone constantly and whispering urgently with Miles whenever Diana wasn't within earshot, her behavior becoming increasingly erratic as the reception progressed. Kirk described how Rebecca's demeanor changed completely after the speech, transforming from radiant bride to anxious woman who kept glancing toward the exits as if planning an escape route, while Miles grew increasingly agitated and started drinking heavily despite having appeared completely sober and in control during the ceremony. Diana later revealed at the hotel bar, after several drinks loosened her tongue and her conscience finally won out over her loyalty to maintaining social appearances, that she discovered Miles was maintaining a long-term relationship with another woman named Vanessa, a dental hygienist he'd been seeing for over 18 months while supposedly building his future with Rebecca and planning their elaborate wedding. The revelation included time-stamped social media posts showing Miles and Vanessa at restaurants and weekend getaways during the same periods he'd told Rebecca he was working overtime on construction projects, credit card receipts that painted a picture of systematic deception spanning months of careful planning, and even photos from Vanessa's private Instagram account where she referred to Miles as her boyfriend and posted about their shared apartment and future plans, completely contradicting the narrative Rebecca had been sold about their exclusive relationship and upcoming marriage. Kirk explained that Diana had initially planned to keep this information to herself, reasoning that it wasn't her place to interfere in someone else's relationship decisions, but watching Rebecca glow with happiness while marrying someone who was actively betraying her proved too much for her conscience to handle, leading to the carefully crafted speech that sounded supportive on the surface but carried devastating implications for anyone who knew the real story. The revelation included evidence that Miles and Vanessa had been living together part-time during the same period he'd been planning his wedding to Rebecca, using the construction business as cover for his absences and scheduling his double life around Rebecca's work schedule with mathematical precision that suggested months of careful planning and deliberate deception. Diana had obtained screenshots of text message conversations between Miles and Vanessa where he complained about Rebecca's neediness and described their engagement as a necessary step for his business networking goals, referring to their upcoming marriage as a temporary arrangement that would provide him with the social credibility he needed to land bigger construction contracts from wealthy clients who preferred working with married contractors. The messages revealed that Miles had been planning to maintain both relationships indefinitely, using his marriage to Rebecca as a business strategy while keeping Vanessa as his actual romantic partner, a level of calculated manipulation that impressed Kirk with its sheer audacity even as it disgusted him with its cruelty. I listened to Kirk recount all of this while methodically cleaning engine parts, feeling a strange sense of vindication mixed with genuine sympathy for what Rebecca was about to discover about the man she'd chosen over our admittedly imperfect but honest marriage, and wondering how long it would take for the carefully constructed facade to completely crumble. Rebecca begins bombarding Owen with calls and messages from different numbers after he blocks her primary contact information. I was 2 weeks into learning the intricacies of lobster trap maintenance when my phone started ringing at strange hours, numbers I didn't recognize showing up at increasingly desperate intervals as Rebecca apparently worked through every burner phone and borrowed device she could get her hands on, trying different tactics to break through the barriers I'd established to protect my peace of mind. During a 2 a.m. call that caught me off guard after a long day preparing boats for the peak tourist season, Rebecca sounded intoxicated and desperate, her voice slurred with what I assumed was wine and raw emotion, admitting that Miles had been staying out all night with increasing frequency and claiming work emergencies that didn't add up when she tried to verify them with his supposed business partners. She confessed to missing our old conversations about everything and nothing, the comfortable silences we used to share while reading different sections of the Sunday paper, the way I used to listen to her work stories without trying to fix everything, and asked increasingly personal questions about my life in Maine, my fishing schedules, whether I'd met anyone new, and if I ever thought about what we'd had together during our better moments. I maintained strict emotional boundaries during these calls, telling her honestly that I felt nothing for her anymore, not hatred or resentment or love, just complete indifference that seemed to exist in the space where our relationship used to be, which appeared to devastate her more than anger or accusations would have, as if my lack of emotional investment was somehow more insulting than active hostility. She kept pushing for some kind of emotional reaction, some sign that our years together had left a permanent mark on my heart, describing moments from our relationship that she remembered as meaningful and asking if I ever missed the way things used to be between us, but I found myself responding to her pain with the same detached sympathy I'd offer to a stranger describing their troubles, a realization that surprised me with its completeness. The conversation took a turn when she started describing the cracks appearing in her supposedly perfect new marriage, how Miles would disappear for entire weekends claiming he was visiting job sites that didn't seem to exist, how he'd become secretive about his phone and defensive when she asked simple questions about his whereabouts. exhibiting the same patterns of deception that should have been familiar to her from her own experience as the other woman. She painted a picture of a man who'd become increasingly distant and hostile once the wedding excitement wore off, someone who treated their shared home like a hotel he visited between other commitments. And I realized she was describing the same pattern of behavior that had destroyed our marriage, except now she was experiencing it from the receiving end instead of being the beneficiary of his divided attention. Her voice cracked as she admitted that the elaborate wedding had been funded entirely through credit cards and loans that Miles had assured her his expanding business would easily cover, but the promised big contracts hadn't materialized and the debt was mounting faster than their income could handle, leaving her trapped in a lifestyle she couldn't afford with a man who was rarely present to share it. She described creditors calling daily, threatening letters arriving in their mailbox, and the growing realization that Miles had been using their joint accounts to fund expenses she knew nothing about, possibly including his relationship with Vanessa, though she didn't mention the other woman by name. The conversation grew more desperate as she admitted that her friends had started avoiding her calls, tired of hearing about her marriage problems and perhaps sensing that she'd made her bed and needed to lie in it, leaving her isolated with no one to turn to except the ex-husband she'd abandoned for a more exciting option. The conversation ended when I firmly stated that her marriage problems weren't my concern and that she'd chosen this path when she chose Miles over honesty and commitment, pointing out that I wasn't her emotional support system anymore and suggesting she seek help from a therapist or trusted friend rather than calling her ex-husband for validation. I hung up feeling oddly sorry for her while simultaneously grateful that her problems were no longer mine to solve, and I realized that the woman who'd once been the center of my world had become just another person whose poor decisions had led to predictable consequences, someone I could wish well from a distance without feeling obligated to rescue. Diana contacts Owen through professional networking sites to provide the complete picture of Miles' deception, including evidence that he'd been juggling multiple relationships simultaneously. I was installing new navigation equipment on a charter boat when I received a LinkedIn message from Diana, Rebecca's college roommate, explaining that she felt compelled to share information that might help me understand the full scope of what had been happening during the final months of my marriage and perhaps provide some closure to questions I'd never thought to ask. She had obtained comprehensive evidence that Miles had been juggling multiple relationships simultaneously, treating each woman like a separate investment in different aspects of his life while maintaining elaborate lies to keep his various worlds from colliding. The dental hygienist Vanessa had confronted Rebecca at her workplace 3 weeks before the wedding, but Rebecca chose to believe Miles' explanation that Vanessa was a delusional ex-girlfriend with boundary issues who couldn't accept that their relationship was over, a story that Diana now realized was completely fabricated to protect his carefully orchestrated deception. Diana revealed through screenshots and documented evidence that Miles had promised Vanessa the marriage was purely for business networking purposes and that he'd divorce Rebecca within 6 months to be with her exclusively, painting Rebecca as a convenient stepping stone rather than someone he genuinely loved or respected. Security camera footage from Rebecca's office building, which Diana had somehow obtained through a friend who worked building security, showed the parking lot confrontation between Vanessa and Rebecca, with Vanessa clearly distressed and Rebecca appearing defensive and dismissive, refusing to consider that the woman might be telling the truth about her relationship with Miles. Social media evidence revealed that Miles had been taking Vanessa on weekend trips during the same periods he claimed to be working construction jobs in remote locations, posting photos from expensive restaurants and luxury hotels under fake names and privacy settings that kept his different relationships compartmentalized and prevented discovery. The web of lies extended to financial deception that went far beyond funding his double life, as Miles had been using joint credit cards to maintain his relationship with Vanessa while also supporting what appeared to be at least one additional woman, a real estate agent named Crystal who believed she was his primary girlfriend for over 8 months. Diana had compiled receipts, photos, social media posts, and even recorded conversations that painted a picture of systematic manipulations spanning nearly 2 years, during which Miles had been simultaneously planning his future with Rebecca while maintaining active relationships with at least 3 other women who each believed they were special and unique in his affections. The evidence included text messages where Miles described his various relationships in transactional terms, referring to Rebecca as his business partner, Vanessa as his emotional support, and Crystal as his recreational companion, treating each woman like they served specific functions in his life rather than complete human beings deserving of honesty and respect. Diana explained that Miles had been operating what amounted to a relationship pyramid scheme, using each woman's resources and emotional investment to fund his lifestyle while promising each of them a different version of their shared future, never intending to honor any of these commitments long-term. The documentation revealed that Miles had been researching divorce laws and asset protection strategies even while planning his wedding to Rebecca, suggesting that he'd always intended the marriage to be temporary and had been positioning himself to minimize financial losses when he eventually moved on to his next target. I spent hours reviewing the evidence Diana had compiled, feeling a strange mixture of vindication and disgust at the sheer scope of Miles' manipulation, while simultaneously feeling grateful that Rebecca's betrayal had inadvertently saved me from being trapped in an even more elaborate web of deception that would have eventually destroyed everything I'd worked to build. Just 6 weeks after the wedding, Rebecca files for annulment citing fraud and emotional manipulation, but Miles countersues for spousal support claiming he gave up lucrative construction contracts to focus on their planned home renovation business. I learned about the legal battle through Kirk, who had become my unofficial source for Phoenix drama and seemed to take perverse pleasure in updating me on the spectacular implosion of the relationship that had destroyed my marriage, and I found myself fascinated by the spectacle of two people who'd betrayed me now tearing each other apart in court with the same ruthless efficiency they'd once used against me. The legal battle became a public spectacle when Vanessa appeared at court hearings with her own attorney, demanding recognition as Miles' legitimate partner and seeking damages for emotional distress, effectively turning what should have been a simple annulment into a three-way legal nightmare that made local news and provided entertainment for everyone who'd witnessed the elaborate wedding just weeks earlier. Rebecca's lawyer painted Miles as a master manipulator who had systematically deceived multiple women for financial gain, while Miles' attorney argued that he was the victim of a vindictive ex-wife who couldn't handle the reality of adult relationships, each side presenting evidence that revealed increasingly sordid details about their brief marriage and the web of deception that had preceded it. Owen received a subpoena to provide testimony about the timeline of Rebecca's affair and the circumstances of their divorce, which he handled with factual precision while refusing to engage emotionally, sticking to dates and documented events rather than offering opinions about character or motivation that might have satisfied his desire for revenge. I testified for exactly 43 minutes, answering questions about when I discovered the hotel receipts, when Rebecca had moved out, and when our divorce had been finalized, treating the entire experience like a business transaction rather than a chance for vindication, though I couldn't help but notice Rebecca's shocked expression when she realized how completely I'd detached from our shared history. 2 additional women emerged with similar stories of Miles' manipulation tactics during the discovery phase of the lawsuit, including Crystal, the real estate agent who'd been led to believe she was his only serious relationship for 8 months, and a restaurant manager named Paula who'd been supporting him financially while he claimed to be building his construction business and planning their future together. Rebecca's parents, who had initially supported her decision to leave me and had even contributed $15,000 toward the elaborate wedding that was supposed to launch her new life, cut off all financial assistance when they realized the extent of her poor judgment, forcing her to represent herself in the final hearings after her attorney withdrew due to unpaid legal fees. The courthouse drama intensified when Vanessa presented bank records showing that Miles had been using joint credit cards in Rebecca's name to fund their relationship, including expensive jewelry, weekend trips, and even the down payment on an apartment they'd shared part-time during the engagement period while Rebecca believed he was working late on construction projects. Miles' construction business, which he'd claimed was expanding rapidly and generating substantial income that would easily support their luxury lifestyle, turned out to be largely fictional, existing mainly on paper with inflated revenue projections and fabricated client contracts that he'd used to impress potential romantic partners and secure credit from unsuspecting financial institutions. The revelation that Miles had been operating under multiple business licenses and tax identification numbers suggested a level of financial fraud that extended far beyond relationship deception, potentially involving criminal activity that would attract federal attention and complicate the civil proceedings with criminal charges. Rebecca found herself liable for debts she'd never authorized and expenses she'd never approved, including a second mortgage on a house she didn't know they owned and credit card balances that had been racked up to fund Miles' elaborate lifestyle with multiple women, leaving her financially devastated just months after believing she'd upgraded to a more prosperous life. The legal fees alone had consumed most of her savings, and the revelation that Miles had been systematically draining their joint accounts to fund his other relationships left her facing bankruptcy at age 32, a dramatic fall from the luxury lifestyle she'd enjoyed during their brief courtship. I watched this unfold from 3,000 miles away with the detached interest of someone observing a natural disaster, feeling grateful that my own legal troubles with Rebecca had been relatively straightforward compared to the Byzantine mess she'd created for herself by choosing excitement over stability and trusting someone who had already proven his capacity for betrayal. 8 months later, Owen has been promoted to harbor master and is in a steady relationship with Sarah, a marine biologist studying coastal ecosystems who appreciates his straightforward nature and shared love of ocean life. I was reviewing maintenance schedules for the entire charter fleet when Connor knocked on my office door to tell me that the promotion had been approved by the board, making me the youngest harbor master in Bar Harbor's history and providing a salary increase that finally allowed me to stop worrying about money for the first time since the divorce had drained my savings and forced me to rebuild from scratch. Sarah had been studying tide pool ecosystems for the University of Maine when we met during a routine inspection of her research vessel, and I'd been immediately drawn to her passion for her work and the way she talked about marine life with the same enthusiasm I felt for perfectly tuned engines and well-maintained boats, a genuine excitement that reminded me what authentic interest looked like after years of Rebecca's performative enthusiasm for whatever seemed trendy or impressive. The annulment case concluded with Miles receiving nothing and facing fraud charges for his financial deceptions, while Vanessa successfully sued him for intentional emotional distress, winning a judgment that would follow him for years even if he never paid a dime of what he owed to the multiple women whose lives he'd systematically destroyed for his own selfish purposes. Rebecca sent one final email acknowledging that she'd destroyed something genuine for the illusion of excitement and admitting she never deserved my loyalty or patience, a message that arrived on the same day I'd signed the lease on a cottage overlooking Frenchman Bay that Sarah and I planned to share after 6 months of dating that felt more real and honest than 7 years of marriage to someone who'd never truly known me. I showed Sarah the message before deleting it permanently, explaining the basic history without dwelling on the emotional details, and she listened with the kind of understanding that came from someone secure enough in herself to hear about past relationships without feeling threatened or competitive, asking thoughtful questions about what I'd learned rather than demanding reassurance about her own position in my life. The email was filled with regret and self-recrimination, Rebecca describing how she'd realized too late that stability and genuine care were worth more than excitement and financial flash, but reading her words felt like hearing about a stranger's problems rather than reliving my own painful history, a detachment that surprised me with its completeness. Connor threw a promotion celebration at his favorite lobster shack, where I found myself surrounded by colleagues who knew nothing about my past failures and saw only my competence and reliability, a refreshing change from Phoenix where everyone had witnessed my public humiliation and divorce proceedings and treated me with the careful sympathy reserved for disaster victims. Sarah fits seamlessly into my new social circle, discussing marine conservation with the fishing captains and sharing stories about her research that made even the most grizzled lobstermen listen with genuine interest, proving that intelligence and authenticity were more attractive than any designer outfit or carefully curated social media presence. The contrast between Sarah's genuine enthusiasm for her work and Rebecca's constant need for external validation became clear during our first major storm, when Sarah insisted on checking her research equipment despite dangerous conditions while Rebecca would have spent the time posting dramatic selfies about surviving nature's fury and complaining about the inconvenience to her schedule. I proposed to Sarah during a weekend trip to explore tide pools in Acadia National Park, choosing a moment when she was photographing sea anemones and explaining the complex relationships between different species, realizing that I wanted to spend my life with someone who found beauty and meaning in the natural world rather than in material possessions and social status markers that meant nothing beyond their price tags. The story ends with Owen watching Sarah photograph sea anemones while reflecting on how leaving Phoenix was the best decision he'd ever made, not because of revenge or vindication, but because it led him to a life built on authenticity rather than deception, surrounded by people who valued substance over appearance and honest work over elaborate pretensions designed to impress strangers. Sarah's acceptance was immediate and joyful, followed by practical questions about timelines and guest lists that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with someone who approached life with both passion and pragmatism, qualities I'd learned to value after years of dealing with someone who confused drama with depth and excitement with genuine connection.